we're not in the real estate business. We're in the experience business. And that's the biggest mistake that most people make, is they think that they can just go put a really good property in a really good area that looks like a model home, and people are going to book it. That's not the case. People are wanting experiences. And if you're not understanding hospitality and experience, it's probably not the right asset class for you.
Welcome to the Generations of Wealth show. I am your host, Derek Dombeck, and today, you're going to listen to the show and you're going to find out that I have a brother from another mother from Utah, and his name is Shawn Moore, and we have got so much in common, it's a little scary. But you know what? Before I bring Shawn on, during this show, we do talk about a lot of different ways to creatively structure things, and in some of the points that were made, I want to address right before you listen to it. Even if you are bankable and you don't think you need to learn how to do creative deal structuring, I strongly encourage you to think differently. And also, the way I get people to accept my creative deal structures is by actually knowing how to talk to people, knowing how to negotiate. So I can help you with that. You can go to our website, nomeansnotyet.com, which is my negotiations course. Check that out. You can always find it also at derekdombeck.com. But, that is the key. You have to know how to talk to people in order to structure deals and everything else in life and business. So, with that said, thank you for being here. Thank you for following us. If you've been following us for a while, thanks for finding us if you just did. And this show is going to be awesome. Let's just get you right to it. And here he is. And if you don't have your video on, you should, because he's dressed very dapper. Mr. Shawn Moore from Utah. How are you doing, Shawn?
I'm doing awesome, Derek. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Well, those of you that don't know me very well, Shawn and I were talking before the show started, just kind of about Western way of life a little bit, and the wholesomeness of having cattle and animals and all the good stuff. But Shawn, why don't you tell everybody about yourself?
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. So I'm from northern Utah. I live up in the mountains in Utah, outside of all the ski resorts. Don't ski. I live right at the base of one of the top ski resorts in Utah, and just watch them ski. But I like like we were talking about before, I like the horses, the cows, and the animals, and just that kind of Western way lifestyle that we have out here. So I started, Derek, back in the year 2000, actually, as my first real estate investing venture. I had a job right out of college, and I lasted about 6 months and realized I could make a lot more money doing the real estate stuff than my job. Back then, it was more wholesale fix and flip type stuff. But I've been full-time real estate investor now for 25 years. It's all that's ever paid my bills. I've seen lots of ups and downs, like you and I were talking about before we hit record. Lots of lessons learned, and that comes along with those ups and downs and the experience and navigating a lot of different asset classes. Primarily for about 6 years, I was doing fix and flip deals, and then graduated into more build jobs, development deals, started doing a lot of residential type development, long-term rentals, and ultimately bought my first short-term rental back in 2006, way before anybody even knew what a short-term rental was. That was before Airbnb was even around. And then we started really liking that asset class, having a lot of fun with it. Kind of the different aspects of kind of a new asset class that wasn't really mainstream at the time. And then COVID hit and became mainstream overnight, and everybody and their dog, and it was kind of the shining star of real estate for a little while. But it's riding that bubble. As you know, those bubbles come down and things come back down to normal levels, and really trying to understand this as an asset class, watching it grow up. We've had a lot of fun doing that. But that's what really is our entire portfolio now, is in the short-term rental game. We started helping people invest in short-term rentals back in 2019, to really walk into this game with their eyes wide open. And unbeknownst to most of the people that got in right after COVID, that was a blip in the market. That was not how the market was going to stay forever. And a lot of new investors don't understand that. And so we've tried to do our best to help people really build portfolios that they enjoy having, but really understanding this asset class and all the pros and cons that come along with it, like any other asset class in real estate. I'm a real estate guy in general. I think it's by far and away the best way for the average American to build wealth and generational wealth, and what you talk about a lot here. And so you're not going to hear me talk bad about almost any asset class in real estate, but they all have pros and cons. We've really enjoyed the short-term rental game and kind of what we've been doing and knowing and putting our efforts into for the last few years.
Well, there's so much to unpack there, and we're probably going to go back to the beginning to start with. But I do love what you said about, every real estate asset class can be, a great asset class. You just got to know what you're doing and know the ins and outs. I've interviewed quite a few people on this show that are in the apartment space and syndicating apartments. And right now, a lot of them are not necessarily the ones that were on this show, but a lot of syndicated apartment owners are crying in their soup. Well,
Yeah.
the nice thing of being in this business for a couple decades, like you and I have, is you kind of see the end of the movie and you see things coming where those that jumped in the last, let's say, 5 years, maybe even 5 to 10, they're freaking out right now.
Yeah.
Well, I see opportunity everywhere.
Yes.
But let's go back to 2000 when you started. Um, and as you got to 2006, 7, and 8, when the whole world fell apart in
Yeah.
our business, how did you navigate through that? Because my listeners know I got my ass handed to me.
Right.
So,
We actually, so I've lost everything twice over that 25-year period. I've started from scratch twice. And so I've made some big moves and some big mistakes along the way. And one of those times that I started over was in 2009. And interestingly enough, it had nothing to do with a crash, if you can believe it. I actually was during from year 2000 to about 2006, we were doing a lot of fix and flips. I started buying single family long-term rentals during that time and started to build a portfolio of some passive income, and didn't really enjoy the long-term rentals, but they were just the means to an end. They were okay, but they were just kind of class B, class C type of single family homes and cash flowing okay. Paying our bills, somebody else is paying it, and building a portfolio. Well, we actually had the opportunity to go out into a development, a very high-end development. And I'm talking like 25, $30 million home type developments. Everybody, private airports and private jets and all kinds of stuff. And at that time, we kind of said no to it for a while because we weren't the principal on the development. They were bringing us in, my wife and I, to run their sales and marketing department, and we were going to be part of the development, but not the principal. And we've always been our own boss, right? We've always just had our own companies, and said no to it for about a year, decided to get into that game. And at that time, we actually sold all of our long-term rentals because I felt like it was just, there were bigger and better things on the horizon. And I sold them in 2006 at the very height of the market. The market starts tanking down. And I look like a genius. And back in my 20s, I acted like a genius instead of saying, no, I just got lucky, right? And the timing just happened to be when I sold them all. I bought them actually, most of them from 2001 to 2002, right after the dot-com bubble, and interest rates were kind of stabilizing right after the late 90s, early 2000s, but we were buying them at like 10% interest rates, right? And so the market wasn't great. We bought them pretty low, and then that market took off and sold them high, put a bunch of money in our pockets, and then started making a lot of money with this high-end resort development. And to the point where we had two private jets at the airports at Salt Lake. We'd fly around, we'd meet these people, we'd bring them in. They were buying these private ski and golf resort type properties. And about in late 2008, right in the middle of all the crash, didn't have anything else going on, and the feds came in and locked up all the computers, locked up file cabinets, overnight shut the resort down. The principals of the resort got indicted on securities charges, and so it went from everything's going great. That very high end is not necessarily affected as much by those kind of shifting economies. In fact, a lot of times they do better in them because they've got their hands in different things. So we were actually doing really well with that, but then overnight it shut down. And this is right in the middle of late 2008, right in the middle of the crash. all I ever knew was real estate. Didn't know what to do. I sat and threw myself a 6-month pity party. And in that time, I lost everything. Lost our houses, short sold our house, lost our vehicles, really lost everything. Finally decided I had to go rebuild during that period of 2009. And I just started selling houses. I got a license, my real estate license, and started working with investors because I had always been an investor. I knew what they were looking for. I knew what they were doing. And to your point where you just made earlier, that there's a lot of really good opportunities right now. There was a lot of really good buying opportunities back then, but a lot of people didn't recognize them. We had actually been in the game long enough to recognize that, hey, there's some good deals. And so I started hustling and trying to work with investors that did have credit and money because I had lost all mine, and started building that back up. And we became the number one sales agents in Utah in 2009, 10, 11 through 12, where we were nominated for large sales team of the year. And we strictly just worked with investors. That allowed me though to get back into investing myself. And so we were able to take that income and get back into development deals, buying properties, building back up our credit, and recognizing what those downturns looked like, and recognizing how to operate, seeing how to succeed in them, even though at that time lost everything during it. But also when you have the ability to rebuild during some of those times, it gives you a lot of confidence that you can do it during the good times too, right? And that's what that did for us. And then it just kind of skyrocketed into, but during that, I told you I bought my first short-term rental back in 2006. I lost everything except for that short-term rental. And that's what really opened my eyes to this asset class. Is I was throwing it on Craigslist and a local classified on the weekends. And it was this lake town in Utah called Bear Lake, Utah, about 2 hours north of Salt Lake. And people would go rent it on the weekends, and it was paying all my bills. It was paying the mortgage, and I was making just a little bit of money. I wasn't making a ton of money, but I didn't lose the house.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, it's the only asset I kept. And that's fast forward. What really opened my eyes and said, maybe there's something to these short-term rentals. Maybe there's something to, renting a vacation home on the weekends. And then it grew from there to what it is today. But it was a couple different things during that downturn that really, really springboarded us to where we're at today.
Well, we could turn this into a several hour long show, comparing notes on what you and I have gone through. But what I will say publicly and have said publicly many times, losing everything was one of the biggest blessings I ever had in my life.
Yeah.
Because the way you had said when you were in your 20s, you were kind of arrogant about all this money you made. And, up until I lost everything, I was probably going to end up the same way, right? And
Yep.
just thought, oh, we're God's gift to real estate investing. We
Yep.
didn't know shit.
Yep.
We really didn't.
Yep.
But, and as we in the Western way of the world say, we didn't know shit from Cheyenne.
Yeah.
So now I get to help people. You get to help people. You've done things moving forward because of the experience you had. And that's the same way that I've looked at everything I've done from that period of my life till present day. But so now you're at 2012, 2013, you're starting to invest again. Where did it go from there?
Yeah. So by that time, we started to do a lot of the development deals. I started to, like build houses, development deals, nicer homes, nicer developments. And my wife and I actually struggled with infertility for years. Never, we were kind of the two couples that we were just both really hard driver business, owners, but wanted kids, eventually wanted a family, never really made it a huge priority, because it wasn't like we weren't trying not to get pregnant, but we didn't really focus on it until about 2009 and 10. We really started saying, hey, listen, we want to really start a family and focus on this, especially coming off of a really hard time, a really tough time rebuilding, just saying, hey, listen, we feel like we're growing a little bit as people and want to try to have a family, and went through a lot of different procedures, and with in vitro and in IUI and everything else. And at the time, in vitro fertilization was really expensive. It still is today, but back then, insurance didn't cover any of it, right? It was just elective type of a procedure. Well, and then we found through all of the different procedures we did that we had to do this one kind of trial that was called ICSI. And at the time, it was very new. It was like had about a 20% chance of working. It was all cash. It was like $150,000 to try it. And we had just rebuilt. We had just started putting some money in the bank. And I'm embarrassed to say that I was on the side of the line saying, I don't know if this is for us. Maybe this is our sign that we don't do this. My wife was the exact opposite, thank goodness. And she said, no, we're doing this. And we were blessed with twins. And that was a huge change for me because you mentioned that kind of that cocky, freewheeling, like thinking I knew everything. And when I had kids, it was different. I really started looking at things different. I really started saying, what kind of an example do I want to be? What do I want to like teach them? How do I want to do things? You talk about generational wealth. I was thinking, what can I pass on to them? And in the beginning, it was a lot about saying, I want to build this empire for them. I want to build this for that. That was my why. It's very interesting, Derek, for me now, though. About a year or two ago, my kids are now 14. I was blessed with twins. I had White and Grace, boy girl twins, and as they were growing up, we really started to build up a business that we wanted them to be a part of a family business. That's one thing I love about short-term rentals is families do get involved in it together. I've never been a part of another asset class that husbands, wives, and kids all invest and get interested in together. There's an aspect of them because they're vacation homes and they create these experience, the personal use of them and creating some of this like this experiential type properties that people get involved in together. And it's very much a family affair, which was fun to me, especially then. And then as they got older, I started thinking, I don't, the legacy that I want to pass on is I want them to know what it takes to do this stuff. I want them to know how to build their own wealth, to run down their own path. And really the legacy that I want to pass on is, that personal responsibility, self-reliance, like running down that road. And that's really what we've focused on trying to pass on to our kids now. And it's not like I really don't have a huge desire to hand them over this huge portfolio unless they were part of building it. And it was interesting how that's changed for me over the years, especially.
Well, Shawn, your story and mine are so eerily parallel. It kind of creeps me out and tears me up at the same time. Some of my listeners know that we also had challenges having kids, and went through a lot of the same things you did in vitro and a lot of the other, very expensive procedures that didn't work. Ultimately, I do have three kids, that one of which is genetically ours, but then two are adopted. And I think it's important for listeners to understand that from the outside looking in, we can look like we have the world by the ass. We're building these big portfolios, we're doing new construction, you're jumping on jets for a while, flying people in, all these things. But real life happens to all of us.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you being open about your story, because no matter how good you are in business or as an entrepreneur, anything can happen. A really good example, just in my home area, my real estate attorney, who's in her mid 50s, 2 weeks before we're recording this, um, brain tumor and emergency surgery, may or may not live, right? Just a really prominent local figure in our area. And so I really appreciate that. I don't know how far we want to expand on this, but I want that to be said.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Derek. And it's interesting too, because when I started really talking about it a little bit more, I was talking to one of my publishers before we did our book, and we were talking about a lot of people were telling me, even to the point of saying, oh, don't bring up, you're getting back on your feet. Don't bring up all the indictments that Mount Holly had and that you guys were involved in any of that stuff. I mean, they weren't indictments on us, but then also same type of people are saying, I don't know if you want to run down that road with, the struggles with the kids and everything else. And it was interesting because there was just something in me that said, no, you know what, there's other people that are go through this stuff. Like you said, it's life, right? We're all dealt with all kinds of stuff, and then we all have to deal with all kinds of stuff. And we were so fortunate and blessed to have our the White and Grace, the twins, and that it worked. But you know as well as I do how emotionally taxing it is
Hmm.
going through that process. And when somebody hears that you went through that story, and you like you said, you get a little choked up every time I hear somebody talk about their story. You get choked up because you know how hard it was. you know the struggle that was there, and other people appreciate that. And I do think that it's nice to be able to say, hey, listen, we're not the only ones, right? And life is short. And when I look back, I mean, we're talking about this 25-year journey, the ups and the downs and everything in between. And everybody wants to talk about the view. Nobody wants to talk about the climb. And when you're on that climb, you feel like you're the only damn one, and you're not. It's like this,
Yeah.
the view lasts about 5 seconds, right? The climb is what the whole 25 years feels like, right? You feel like you're in the middle of a shitstorm the whole time. And
Mhm.
whether it's on the personal side, whether it's on the business side, whether it's navigating, you know, you hear like somebody, a colleague or somebody that gets, you know, diagnosed with a tragic illness, and something like that. And you're just like, man, you know, accidents happen, you hear about, and you're just like, that's what we're all dealing with. And I think today's day and age, you know, we look on Instagram and Facebook and everything else, and it seems like nobody else deals with that stuff, right? Everybody's got six-pack abs, they're perfect shape, and then they make millions of dollars and fly around on jets. That's what we see, right? And that's not the reality. I mean, those things are there, and those things are what we strive for, and we want those views for everybody, but it doesn't come without the struggles. One thing that we talk about at Odyssey all the time is, we work with somebody, you better be ready to roll up your sleeves. You better be have extreme ownership, personal responsibility, self-reliance. And if those things don't resonate with you, and hard work, we're probably not going to be the right recipe for you. And because that's what it takes. And I believe that. And I think that throughout all those different ups and downs of life, that's what everybody's dealing with. But it's what makes us better and stronger too. Like back in my 20s, I thought I was king shit on Turd Island, right? And it was, I thought I was, you know, nobody could tell me different. I was the biggest and baddest real estate investor that ever walked the face of the earth. And I walk into real estate investment club meetings like that. And I remember that was what really churned my thought process around on passive income back in the day. One time, in one of those meetings, I had no interest in learning something back then. I was just doing it,
Mhm.
and I wanted to show off. And this old boy named George, he put his arm around me. He said, Shawn, you got to take it down a notch, man. He said, you keep referring to yourself as this big real estate investor. First of all, you're not a real estate investor. And I, at that time, my jaw about hit the floor. And I thought, what are you talking about, George? And he said, first, you fix and flip houses. You have a job selling houses, basically. He said, you're fixing them up, selling them. If you stop that, you make no money. Real estate investors actually have assets that create passive income for them. So maybe go build a portfolio that creates some passive income, then come tell me you're a real estate investor. And that I'll never forget that conversation.
Mhm.
And it was what I needed to hear at the time. But I had to hear a lot of those, and I had to lose things, and I had to have some struggles, and to really come to where I'm at today, where it's I just look at things different, and I don't think I could ever have looked at them the way I do today without all of those struggles. I don't look at my kids the same without going through the in vitro and the struggles that we did, right? It's just different, and I'm grateful for all of it.
I know, just being a landlord for, the last 20 plus years, and you got tenants that have three kids with three baby daddies, and you just want to take them home and give them a good home, and you can't. You
Yeah.
literally can't get
Yes.
involved. You can't do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, the emotions when you go through what you and I have been through, and plenty of others as well, right? I remember, conversation when, because we had miscarriages, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's part of it. And people come out of the woodwork, and you start finding out how common miscarriages are, but
Yeah.
nobody, especially in the past, nobody really talked about it. But I know for me, the big one was when we decided to adopt our son Robbie from China. And it's a long process. So we
Yeah.
we have this match with this little baby on the other side of the world, and it's at that time it was about $50,000 is what that adoption cost. And Robbie's 14 now, so he was 1 year old when we got him. So $50,000, and I wasn't bankable. I didn't have a pot to piss in, and nobody would give me anything. It was the first time I ever raised private money was to pay for Robbie's adoption.
Wow.
And it was a life lesson, but you just said it. You don't take your kids for granted when, some people look at their wife and look at them sideways and they're pregnant, and that's awesome for you, anybody that can do that. But don't take those babies for granted. They're not always easy to come by.
No, they're not. And it's funny. You and we you say that, and you're like, it's but for me, it's probably exactly what the struggle we need to go through. The hard part for me for through all that was, and I don't know if it was for you guys, but Teresa would, every time something didn't work, it felt like she blamed herself. Maybe she wasn't eating right. Maybe she did something wrong. Maybe she did. And it's just, in trying to be that emotional support person for somebody that, for the guys, we kind of have it easy, right? For the women, they're going, I would even argue that's even way more emotionally tolling and taxing on them during that process. And seeing it firsthand, like I have people all the time when I speak on stages that hear that story and then they just want to hug, right? And they come up and the lady's like, man, thank you for acknowledging that because it's just, it was hard. And it's awesome to see that now, right? And being
Yeah.
able to be a part of that and those, just somebody else saying, I'm just glad I'm not the only one. I'm glad, like even when you and I talk, like we're like, man, these stories are so parallel. Like it's crazy, right? And
Mhm.
it's pretty awesome to know that there's other people that, we can turn to and that have gone through it and that can give advice and that at least just know how we felt, right? And that's
Yeah.
what that's at the end of the day what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, man, I had no idea we were going down this path in this show today,
Right.
but I'm very glad we have. But let's turn it back into, the vacation rental space because that is your expertise at this point. Um, yes, people got in just like any boom. They get in, they flood the market with, stupid offers, overpay for properties. Now they're starting to see cash flows going down. What are you seeing and what are you projecting?
Yeah. So in about the late 2022, 2023, we started seeing a big shift, right? That COVID era boom was over. And that's exactly what it was. It was just this boom. It was like the gold rush, right? Everybody thought this was the big ticket to riches. And anytime, if you feel like that, that should be a sign for anybody that's new that feels like, oh, I got to get in. It's the the next best thing. That's when you want to pause and hit the brakes a little bit, right? And Warren Buffett always said it best. Be greedy when others are fearful, and fearful when others are greedy. And that time that most people didn't, adhere to that level of thinking or that line of thinking, and they rushed in and overpaid for properties. But really. It's not even the matter of overpaying for properties. They had no clue how to underwrite. They don't even understand the business they were in. And then all of a sudden, the market just got the reason it was so good is that supply demand gap was so wide, right? There was
Yeah.
so much more demand than supply, and so that supply caught right back up. The demand is still there. The demand continues to go up every single year. In fact, it continues to shock me. It grows by almost about 11% a year, even after that shift had happened. But the shift happened when supply caught up to demand. So now there's plenty of supply out there. And so you have to do things to operate toward the top of the market. Most people, there's just a lot of moving parts when it comes to underwriting and really understanding the business you're in. We're not in the real estate business. We're in the experience business.
Mhm.
And that's the biggest mistake that most people make is they think that they can just go put a really good property in a really good area that looks like a model home and people are going to book it. That's not the case. People are wanting experiences. And if you're not understanding hospitality and experience, it's probably not the right asset class for you. And the nice thing about we're getting far enough removed from that boom that the people that are getting into it now are looking at it a little bit different. There are a lot more resources now, right? When I started, there was no resources to underwrite. There was just it was the Wild West, and you were trying to figure it out as you went. Now there's just a lot more resources, but there's a lot of properties. You go into a lot of Florida towns, and you go into a lot of these vacation home markets. You see a lot of for sale signs up, and for us, it's I don't like that anybody is getting having to get rid of a house that's not performing, but there's a lot of really good opportunities out there right now on the buy side. And from the outside looking in, sometimes if you don't really understand what you're looking at, just like in 2009 and 10, there were good buys back then, and we all wish we would have bought back then, but it was hard to justify it because they were, if you bought today, it was going to be worth less tomorrow. That's a tough pill to swallow in real estate, and that's the environment we had back then. Now it's not as much the case now, but you got a lot more inventory and you got a lot of properties that are underperforming, and you have to say, is this going to be a good asset class for me to dive into? We have a lot of fun with it, but just you have to walk into it with your eyes wide open.
Did you get to a point because just like myself, right? Credit was shot, everything else. Did you get to a point where you started getting more creative on your deal structuring and your acquisitions?
Yeah, when I started building back up, I used a lot of lease option type structures. I acquired a lot of properties through lease options, and then would resell them. I would actually flip them if because the first few I couldn't perform after a year or two. My credit wasn't good enough to buy them, but
Mhm.
I had equity in them. I had a good option price, and we'd sell them. And so we used a lot of that creative financing side. I've done a lot of seller finance, right? Those are skill sets that every investor should understand. And it's whether it's lease options, subject to wrap type deals, just regular seller financing. It doesn't matter what asset class you're in. That should be a baseline foundational understanding of knowledge of those types of deal structures because those types of deals are out there. They're out there all the time. They've been out there my entire 25-year investing career. And we've used them the whole time. And it's not, and I tell, because people always ask us, well, Shawn, do you teach this stuff? I said, I don't know. I don't teach that stuff. I expect you should be able to gain that knowledge and have that baseline education on those types of deal structures. So when you're negotiating offers, that might be on the table for you because there are going to be times, even if you are investable, even if you do have good credit, capital sometimes is tight or a deal pops up and you're like, man, I want to do this. It wasn't on my radar. I wasn't really in buying mode, but I want to be able to structure this deal. And those types of having that education and that knowledge in your tool chest allows you to go have some really good conversations and make win-win deals for you and the seller. A lot of people assume that those types of deals are not good for sellers. They can be really good for sellers, especially depending on their tax situation. If they're in any sort of a distress situation, they've got to get out of the house soon. You can be really helpful by understanding those types of deal structures.
Well, I've said this, and it's so nice to have somebody else saying it right alongside me because I've said this throughout all of my years of teaching other people. It didn't matter if it's an up market, down market, those other tools can absolutely work. And and people get lazy if they're
Yep.
bankable. I
Yep.
was lazy in the 2000s. I was bankable, and they just say, "Okay, I'm not going to learn." But then when something happens and they're no longer bankable, then it takes a long time to ramp up. If you
Yes.
go and have that ready, for me personally, every deal is a creative structure until proven otherwise.
Right.
Cash is fine. I can buy cash, but that's lazy and I don't want to do it any more than I have to. And I have not used a bank for an investment property in over a dozen years.
Yeah.
And
Awesome.
and I'm bankable. I just choose not to. I would rather pay people versus institutions.
Right. Yeah. It's awesome. And it's once you understand it, once you realize it's not that difficult and it can be win-win. That's I think the biggest thing that people like one, you hit on right on the head. You get lazy. I have plenty of times just been like, it's just easier. Just go put the money down, get me a bank loan, right? Especially when you're bankable. You do get lazy at times. And I'm guilty of that, just like everybody else. But there's also thing that I believe that holds a lot of people back that have never done creative deals is they assume that it's kind of trying to pull the wool over the seller's eyes or together a deal that's only good for you as the investor. It's not good for the seller. That's not true. There's so many of these deals that are so good for the sellers and it works for everybody on really quality assets. Another thing is I think people think that if it's a quality asset that produces that nobody would ever sell it that way. They would just sell it for cash or they'd sell it. And that's 100% not the truth, the case.
No, and where that comes from is being, in my opinion, being selfish, right? If you're out there truly trying to solve that seller's problem and the creative structure is the best solution, you're selfish to not offer that
Yes.
solution
Yeah.
and just give them a cash offer, which may not put as much. I literally closed on a property about 3 weeks before we're recording this. The guy was 5 months behind on his bank note. My cash offer could clear his bank note, but it didn't help him as much as he needed. He needed more money.
Yeah.
So we caught up his loan, bought it subject to, gave him some cash at close, and he's carrying the remaining balance of the purchase price on payments for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
That is the best scenario because we're actually making his payments, fixing his credit. If we would have just paid it off, that would not have fixed his
Mhm.
credit. We're
Yeah.
gonna over time help him. That's that's the way I feel like it should be done.
Yeah. Love it. And I mean, we could talk about creative structure deals that you and I have done for the last 20 years all day long. And the end of the day, if you're a real estate investor, that is 100% something you should invest the time and effort into understanding is how to create those types of deals. And many of them are super simple. Lease options are a super simple way to do a creative deal. And you ultimately don't own the home until you execute that option. But it can be a great way to get in and control a home, lock in a price, get your credit better or whatever, save up the cash you need to. That's a super simple way to do it. Back then, that's the only one I understood. And so I used my first of my career. It's the only creative deal structure I even understood. And so I ran down that road and I was like, man, look how many properties we acquired from
Mhm.
doing this. And then we start getting into subject twos and, which are just the wrap structure. And then ultimately just regular seller financing. There's so many homes that are owned free and clear right now
Mhm.
that a lot of sellers will just say, hey, listen, I don't want this huge taxable event. Give me X amount of money as a little bit of a down payment. I'll carry it for X amount of time and you can balloon me out later.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Man, like I said before, we could talk and talk and talk for hours, and we may do that over a cocktail at some point
Yeah.
and not record it. But Shawn, what's one question I should have asked you that I didn't? And it can be about any topic.
Ooh, what is my favorite steak place in the US? Should have asked me that.
Then answer it, man.
Because you look like Derek. I just take you as a steak guy, so
Oh, 100%. Meat
we
and
should have.
potatoes my whole life, for sure.
Bourbon and Bones in Scottsdale, Arizona is my favorite steak place. So that's let's if you're listening and or you're anywhere near Scottsdale, Bourbon and Bones, you got to get the bone-in ribeye, and it comes out on a platter. It'll have all the burning butter and everything, and then they smoke it's called Bourbon and Bones because they have almost 200 different scotches and whiskeys there, and so you get in and they do. It's a pretty fun place to be. So
I
you
gotta
didn't
tell
think I
you.
was going to go there, right? You were like,
No, that's why I love that question because I never know where it's going to go. But see, you hit on the other thing is bourbon. That's my other
yeah,
thing I enjoy. So now I have to go to Scottsdale just to go to that restaurant because they have everything I love.
yeah.
Makes
There you
sense.
go. And you're from Wisconsin, so it's a perfect place to go in the middle of the winter when you need a little warm up. Like that's where I'm from Utah, so we always go there. Like this time of year, I'm not too interested in Scottsdale, but
Yeah,
talk to me in January, and I'm very interested.
absolutely. Well, Shawn, thanks so much. It was a great show. Appreciate all your feedback and just your knowledge and your openness.
Awesome, Derek. I appreciate you having me.
Well, for everybody else, you got no excuses. Shit's gonna happen to you, but you just get on, pull your boots on, put your hat on every day, and go to work, work through it, and know that there's others like us out here that are here to help you. So, till the next show, go live your vision, love your life. See ya.